TikTok is a rat hole of propaganda, funded by Iran, funded by China, funded by Russia, but Iran and China primarily. And so you're right in your first supposition is that we've made immense strides forward, especially since the Berlin Wall fell and the idiot communist regimes around the world that were doing everything they could to destroy their own people's economy have collapsed, and people have turned, at least in the main, to something approximating free market and free exchange solutions. And so the world has 8 billion people on it, something like that, 7 to 8 billion. We'll peak at about 9. We've done a tremendous amount to eradicate absolute poverty, and there are lots of reasons to be positive, but that's all in the face of an anti-human campaign that's really been going on since the 1960s with the Club of Rome and Paul Ehrlich, the Stanford biologist who's, I don't know, he's the worst person who's emerged in the last 60 years, but he's certainly a contender. Massive campaign of demoralization. Now, I see it everywhere when I tour around lecturing about young people dying for lack of an encouraging word. It's really, and in the face of all this possibility, it's really quite awful.
Yeah, it is. And, I was very struck by something that Elon Musk said to you when you interviewed him for your hugely successful podcast. Let's take a look.
La diabetes puede ser muy peligrosa. Generalmente provoca úlceras alrededor del pie que muchas veces pueden terminar en una infección grave o una amputación.
Si usted tiene diabetes y tiene problemas a causa de la insulina, haga su cita hoy mismo en San Miguel Urgent Care para recibir ayuda de inmediato por un equipo de doctores y enfermeras especializados. La consulta es solo $50 las 24 horas. Llámenos ahora mismo al 1-800-322-2222.
I was actually tricked into signing documents for one of my old boys later. This is before I had really any understanding of what was going on. We had COVID going on, and so there was a lot of confusion. And I was told they were like commit suicide.
That was a line right from the outset.
I lost my son essentially. So they call it dead naming for a reason.
Yeah.
So that the reason it's called dead naming is because your son is dead. My son David is dead. Killed by the World Mind Virus.
I mean, I thought it was a startling thing to watch that and to hear him say that. And we've watched that kind of human tragedy of his family play out in public because this boy we had, his son, now identifies in a different way and is very hostile towards him and says so on social media and so on. But what did you feel when Elon Musk said, look, right now, the richest, most successful, and in many ways, most entrepreneurial guy in the world, somebody who is really trying to save the world from itself in many ways, through Tesla, through SpaceX, through Neuralink, all these extraordinary things. There he was, just gripped in his own human crisis with his own family because of a mindset which has wrestled his child away from him.
Well, that shows you how pervasive the problem is, especially with regards to our current misconceptions of what constitutes identity. Even someone like Elon Musk has a family that falls prey to it. And, you said at the beginning of this interview that I tend to say things that are, let's say, incendiary, so I might as well do that right now. I think that every single medical professional and psychological professional who has been, who's played a role in facilitating the trans butchery of my younger children should be put in prison for the rest of their lives for crimes against humanity. It is the worst medical and certainly psychological scandal that I've ever seen in my entire life. And the only things that I've seen that rival it are the medical experiments that were conducted by the Nazis and the Japanese in the running up to World War II. It's absolutely unforgivable. And that lie that we told Elon Musk, would you rather have a live trans child or a dead child? There's never been a single bit of evidence to suggest that has no grounding whatsoever in empirical fact. It's an absolute bloody lie. It's pathological beyond belief. We know in the United States, for example, that at least 8,000 young women have been subjected to double mastectomies, minors. And that's the documentation on the insured medical procedure side. So there's a lot more than that. And also now that puberty blocking drugs are available outside the medical community in the black and gray market at a much higher rate than is occurring within the medical space. And that the fact of this trans epidemic, which is exactly what it is, it's a psychological epidemic, and the liars say, those children are all now free to show their true identity. It's another complete bloody lie. All of that's, it's so unacceptable. It was so sad to hear Musk walk through that. I mean, there's a world of grief behind that story, and there's plenty of stories like it. I can't believe as well, I mean, this is one of the things that I hold seriously against the Democrats in the United States, let's say, the Liberals in Canada and the Labour Party in the UK, is that if you people are behind this identity politics and you think that it's a good idea to free up young women in particular to find their true identities as men, there is something seriously sick about you. It's inexcusable. It's absolutely inexcusable. There is no evidence whatsoever for any of those gender transformation identity claims, as the Cass report clearly indicated. So, you know, the UK has walked back a little bit, but not the US and not Canada. And so it's really, Jesus, the more you know about that surgery, the more it will, like, it'll curdle your spine. It's experimental medicine conducted by butchering sadists at its absolute worst. What they do to people to transform them into, what would you say, malfunctioning pseudo members of the opposite sexes, it's far beyond belief. And I would like to also point out clinically that there's been evidence for a very long time that sadists are overrepresented in the profession of surgery. And all you have to do is think for about 15 seconds before you can figure out why that might be. So yeah, it's really, man, as far as moral crimes go, sterilization or mutilation of children, involuntary, because they cannot consent to such medical procedures. And so that's a crime against humanity in accordance with UN definitions. And so I just think it's to call it reprehensible is to barely scrape the surface.
Yeah.
And I don't think it'll stop till there are the right length of prison sentences for the people who've been involved in it.
Yeah. The other thing that Elon Musk has been at the centre of course, is the battle, as he puts it, for free speech.
Fentanyl wasn't invited, but it's here. Hiding in party drugs like MDMA and cocaine. And those pills that look like Xanax, Adderall, and Oxy? Counterfeit. And often laced with deadly fentanyl. Won't be long till their friend overdose shows up. Learn how to keep your friends safe from fentanyl overdose at factsfightfentanyl.org.
We've seen you coming under attack. Probably like we've never seen free speech be attacked before. Is it because people don't understand what free speech actually is? Or is it because this mind virus that Musk talks about has turned people who, if you ask them, they say, oh, I'm a liberal, but it's actually turned them into a new breed of fascists?
Well, we can't again underestimate the impact of the new technologies. You know, we've invented a whole variety of means Like, it's a major transformation, and it's only one of a series of such transformations that are continually occurring in the virtual space. And so one of the things we have to understand is that we can't contend with this because we don't understand the significance of the technologies. You know, I've been watching Zuckerberg and Musk try to deal with the issue of policing the net. And you can see both of them are whipping boys in a way. Right? Zuckerberg is a whipping boy for people on the right, and Musk is a whipping boy for people on the left. But they're both making a mistake. Both groups are making a mistake in attacking those two, in my estimation, even though they may have done things that weren't wise or well considered as they were experimenting their way forward. It's like nobody knows how to police the net. And the idea that you can link together hundreds of millions of people who can now communicate while bearing no responsibility whatsoever for the content of their utterances, the idea that we can do that without a policing mechanism is absurd. We've never been able to do that. Now, what the policing method should be, now that's a complicated problem. Right? It's just as complicated as the issue of free speech and its limits itself. And the truth of the matter is we don't know. You know, I talked to Next Friedman after a podcast I did with him recently about one of the things that I think is pathologizing discourse. You know, I believe that the 3 to 5% of the population who are clinical psychopaths, and that's about what it is, see, they'll weaponize political discourse, left-wing and right-wing, because they don't give a damn about politics. They'll weaponize political discourse, bring attention to themselves, and they can do that on their anonymous accounts because they can't be held responsible. And so they can gain social reputation in a narcissistic and pathological way, while dementing the entire field of discourse to everyone's downfall. Like, a friend of mine has been doing polling on main political issues for the last few months. He's working on a project designed to address the excesses of the victimizer narrative that underlies such phenomena, let's say, as anti-Semitism. And he showed quite clearly that Americans, and you could extrapolate to the rest of the West, Americans hold views that are 85% in common across a very broad range of contentious political issues. And yet we have the amplification of divisive political discourse that makes everyone believe that there's far more division than there is. And that's all weaponized by a cadre of psychopaths. And you might think, well, you're exaggerating that, Dr. Peterson. It's like, I'm not exaggerating that. The problem of manipulative parasitism is an ancient biological problem. There's evidence that sex in itself evolved to solve the parasite problem. And really what we have online is the fact that the free social media communication networks are swarmed by parasites who are narcissistic and Machiavellian, and they're warping and twisting the system to bring themselves up into a public view they don't deserve by exaggerating the significance of the discrepancy between people. And like, I think of all the things that I can see happening, especially in the online world, there's plenty of dangers in the real world, but on the online world, the fact that the narcissistic psychopaths have the upper hand in the realm of free, so-called free discourse is what would you say first and foremost among them. One of the things I recommended, well, Friedman and I talked about this, is I think that on social media platforms, the anonymous people and the verified human beings should be put in separate bins. Like, I think the anonymous people should be allowed to have their say, but they should be categorized separately from the verified human beings, because otherwise they can't be held responsible for their utterances. Now, we know there's immense psychological literature on this. We know that if you put people in situations where they're shielded from the repercussions of their actions, they're much more likely to misbehave. And that's really terrible in the case of people who are really prone to misbehave. Like, if you're driving in your car, that bug shell you protect yourself with, you're much more likely to curse at someone if they cut you off than you would be if you were walking and they could hear you.
Right.
Now, a lot of what regulates our social behavior is immediate feedback that pertains to our reputation. That's all stripped away, especially in the case of the anonymous troll demons online. And it's really bad.
Jordan, let me ask you, is there a correlation